everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the Tuesday 4 o'clock News and Politics Show. Would like to thank Jennifer Lawless down at the University of Virginia for Skyping in. How are you today, Jennifer?
I'm fine. How are you?
We are good up here in Rhode Island, but what do you think is gripping the Beltway more? The hearings for Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court of the United States, or what we're hearing from Bob Woodward's new book?
I think it's safe to say that during the lunch break of the Kavanaugh hearings, everyone was flipping through the book. The Kavanaugh hearings are obviously more substantively important right now, but there's no question that a lot of the stuff coming out of Bob Woodward's book is raising eyebrows and causing, quite a bit of concern. Some of the excerpts have been incredible, and some of the tapes that he's released as his primary sources have been pretty riveting as well.
Well, again, the difference between, the fire, the fury, and this book from Woodward, again, with just Woodward's legacy and track record, the big thing that has come out apparently is Trump being very upset that he was not interviewed for the book.
Right, so I don't know if you heard the clip, but there's this great excerpt where Bob Woodward is talking to Donald Trump, and Trump says, well, I don't understand, why didn't you come talk to me? And Woodward explains that he tried through 6 or 7 different people to get to him, including his communications department and Kellyanne Conway and Lindsey Graham. And Trump says, no, you should have just called me. I have 2 or 3 secretaries. They can just put you through, which demonstrates that Donald Trump certainly is not aware of the fact that he's no longer running the Trump Organization. But it's also important because Trump's argument to Woodward is, well, if he doesn't talk to him, then it'll obviously be a bad book. And if he talked to him, it would be a good book. Suggesting that he can't even rely on the people around him to convey what's important or the truth.
So some pretty damning pieces of information coming out from this book, everything from things that James Mattis has said to John Kelly about the president.
Right.
What's the fallout?
Well, there are a couple of things. Like, if the president actually believes that John Kelly said he was an idiot and that he works in Crazy Town, it's hard to imagine that he's going to be around for much longer. The issue, of course, is that similar to Fire and Fury, the president can say that this is not well-sourced, that it's anonymous, that people aren't being held accountable. The problem, though, is that Bob Woodward said that he's recounting specific statements from specific people who were on the record at the time. Now, I don't know if this was 6 months ago and John Kelly figured the odds of me still being here 6 months later are zip, I'm going to tell the truth, or if he just sort of lost himself amid the conversation. But it's going to be hard to dismiss this, especially because Donald Trump previously has said that he respects Woodward as a reporter.
And of course, the big news here today, Bob Woodward is going to be the keynote speaker at the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council's dinner in October. So we're looking forward to that up here. Let's talk to
I think I need to buy a plane ticket.
Come on up, come on. I don't have to coax you up here. But let's talk about what is the big ticket at hand today. And of course, this is Brett Kavanaugh, the hearings taking place. And it's kind of the theater. It's the brouhaha. It's what already started earlier today when finally, 47,000 documents were released from his past for review. And we've had some eyebrows raised as to clearly the timing of it. That really sort of kicked it off, but not unexpected.
Not unexpected, but there are a few things that are important here. The first is those 47,000 documents that are released amid the hearings, which means that nobody is going to be able to comb through them the way that they would need to, still represent only about 47% of the overall documents that have not been released. So there are apparently another 53 or 54,000 documents that we'll likely never see. And that means that it's difficult for the Democrats to make the strongest case that they can against Kavanaugh because they don't have all of the information. The second thing is there seems to be no reason except playing politics that these documents are not being released. There's nothing to suggest that the confirmation will not go through. It's not going to be 60 or 70 or 80 senators voting in favor of him, but it's almost impossible to figure out a scenario whereby he doesn't get through. So withholding these documents is really just making the Democrats' lives difficult. There's no rhyme or reason, especially given that similar documents were released when John Roberts was being appointed and ultimately confirmed, and it was just seen as normal order. There was nothing political or nothing sort of strange about that. And we were amid very polarized times at that point, too. So it just demonstrates the degree to which everything has continued down this spiral of dysfunction.
And let's talk about the hearings themselves as well. We did see multiple interruptions, protesters, Kavanaugh's family being ushered out. Do we expect this moving forward? Is this an aberration because it's the first day? Is this a breakdown of democracy? Of course, protest, free speech is allowed, but what do we expect moving forward?
I don't know that it's a breakdown of democracy. It certainly highlights the breakdown of civility. It used to be, I watched RBG last night, and during her confirmation hearings, she said explicitly, I support a woman's right to choose. I will never vote against a woman's right to choose. It's fundamental to women's democratic integrity and autonomy. The idea of a Supreme Court nominee making such a statement like that today would be grounds to blow up the building, right? Like, this would just fly in the face of everything that we discussed. So, I think the first day of these hearings, perhaps even the second day, sort of test the limits about what the committee will find acceptable, what they'll allow at the hearing, what they'll allow outside the hearings. But
especially outside.
I don't expect there to be much. I don't expect much to change as far as what's going on outside the building, just because the stakes are so high. And this is the first time the stakes have been this high for an entire generation. He will be pivotal on some important key social policy issues where in the past it was a conservative justice replacing a conservative justice, not a conservative justice replacing a swing vote. So I think that's why passions seem to be running a little bit higher than usual.
But have we seen this before, Jennifer? I mean, talking about, what's coming out of the gallery and folks literally shouting, needing to be escorted out, really not even allowing the process to go forward or trying to stop the process to go forward. Have we seen it at this level before? We've seen this at college campuses around the country. And also want to talk about Steve Bannon and the New Yorker. Where are we in this country in terms of discourse when there's those who don't want discourse to take place in the first place?
Well, it's tricky because the people that don't want the discourse to take place in the first place are reacting to really vitriolic discourse that has come before them, right? And so it's very difficult. It's not that both sides are created equal in this case. It's not that both sides either oppose or support free speech. It's that one side has taken that speech in a direction that flies in the face of the civil liberties and civil rights of the other side, and now that side is pushing back, right? And we saw people like Jim Carrey and Judd Apatow say that they would not attend the New Yorker event if Steve Bannon spoke, in part because of what he represents. Now, a Supreme Court confirmation hearing is a little bit different. There's no question that Brett Kavanaugh is qualified. He's been on the circuit court. This is not a crazy person out there spewing hatred. Now, a lot of people will interpret some of the decisions that he's made or some of the stances that he takes as indicative of not completely valuing all citizens. But it certainly does seem to be cut from a different mold. And I think it's dangerous if we go down the path of not letting these hearings come through.
Let's just stick inside the Beltway for a moment with some legal issues. What the president has been saying again about Jeff Sessions.
I mean, it's gotten to the point where the president has managed to do the impossible. There are literally dozens of Democrats now defending Jeff Sessions and saying that he should stay on as Attorney General, when, with the exception of recusing himself from the Mueller investigation, he has done nothing that the Democrats support and basically embodied everything that the Democrats hate and fight against. So kudos to Donald Trump for doing the impossible on that front. Jeffrey Toobin, a legal analyst at CNN, said that Trump's latest tweet and the comments could potentially be grounds for impeachment. Because this is a situation where he's now explicitly saying that he believes that the Department of Justice should not only be acting in his own interest as Donald Trump, but also in the interest of Republican candidates across the country. And the idea that they started investigations that could compromise the likelihood of winning for two Republican candidates for the House of Representatives to Donald Trump means that the Justice Department isn't doing its job, when in fact that is the Justice Department's job. And so, I think this is one of the first times that we've seen Trump try to deploy DOJ, not only in his own self-interest, but for the self-interest of the party. And, even Paul Ryan said that he didn't think that was a good idea.
So you allude to the political futures of candidates. Of course, we are looking at November. Let's talk about the latest poll that just came out, the general poll, if you will, AP Washington Post. looking at Democrats having now a 14 across the board point advantage?
What I would say is that these generic ballot polls really need to be taken with a grain of salt, because people are not voting for hypothetical generic candidates when they actually cast their votes on election day. They're voting for two people that they have probably been somewhat exposed to, or at least one of them as an incumbent in their district. And so that's not to say that these numbers don't mean something. They do, and it's likely that the Democrats will take back the House, but I think it's very feasible that they'll take it back and wind up with a 3 or 4 seat majority. You know, we shouldn't expect a 65 seat flip.
Okay, and let's talk about political futures as well. The news about Rahm Emanuel.
You know, when Rahm Emanuel was in the House of Representatives, I was convinced he was ultimately going to be Speaker of the House and that he was going to climb that ladder. And then when Barack Obama tapped him to be Chief of Staff, everybody always says yes, because how do you say no to a president? And then he reinvented himself when he ran for mayor of Chicago, and it's been one problem after the next. So I don't find this news particularly surprising. He was caught in a very hot re-election campaign last time around. It makes sense that he doesn't want to do it again, especially given that there seems to be this anti-establishment wave out there. And he's been linked to a lot of establishment politics. So, you know, I think incumbents look around and they think if it's not a sure thing, or if the odds aren't very, very stacked in their favor, it might be time to pursue other interests.
What do you think, though, of folks pointing at him and saying, well, maybe he's got broader political aspirations? Can he overcome the troubles that he had in Chicago?
I think he can, but he needs to take a break, and that could be part of the reason he's doing it too. The more you distance yourself from something that didn't necessarily go well, whether that's running a city or engaging in some kind of other scandal, the easier it is to reinvent yourself. And so if he can spend the next couple of months campaigning on behalf of popular Democrats just so that he can sort of shore up his credentials again among Democratic donors, there's nothing to suggest that he couldn't run for some kind of higher office. We also see there are lots of returns to politics. I mean, today, former Senator John Kyle was appointed to replace John McCain. And so who knows, maybe Rahm Emanuel's future will be back in the House of Representatives.
So what else will you be watching, Jennifer, flipping between coverage of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and finding out more about this Bob Woodward book?
Well, I think that one of the most important races that will sort of serve as a bellwether is the Massachusetts race in the Democratic primary between Mike Capuano, the incumbent, and Ayanna Pressley, who's on the city council there. He's a relatively popular incumbent. He's about 10 points up in the polls, but she's trying to channel this new kind of energy, the younger, fresher face of politics. She's a Black woman, and as a result is able to mobilize a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm among young voters. And if he's defeated, then I think that sends even one more signal that nobody should be not running scared.
Well, again, we're keeping an eye here on the primary next week, but hopefully we'll catch you just before on a Tuesday because it will take place Wednesday. But Jennifer Lawless down at UVA, as always, appreciate taking the time to pick your brain.
Have a good day.
Okay, thanks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with our next guest here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center.